boy. Been a lot of articles along the lines of freedom of speech. It's been hijacked by the far right to fuck with democracy. And this. Anti-elitism. You've just got to stop being against... You just got to stop being against the elites. Because it's just it's so problematic. No... And let me, a member of the journalist class, explain why. So listen, we all know what the Washington Post is garbage these days. We all know the New York Times is garbage. I don't know if you've been following, but they were in court over basically saying that Sarah Palin, her campaign, it was somehow directly linked to a shooting. And obviously it wasn't, but it just doesn't meet the US standard of libel, so you're just going to toss it out. And nobody learned anything. And that's the American media right there. Anyway, yeah, won't somebody think about the elites? Yeah. So we're off to a great start in this article. It was relatively easy to spot the QAnon adherents in the crowd at Donald Trump's rally in New Hampshire in August 2019, given they were generally adorned with Qs, the way a college freshman is adorned with his school's colour on game day. Now, as many of you know, and I've still got the footage from it, actually, I went to a Trump rally. I wanted to see if it was the way the media portrayed it. I don't think I ever talked about this, so we'll just before we get into his description of Trump stuff. I went to a Trump rally, pretty big one, and it was fucking weird, is the best way to describe it. It was really weird. Yeah, I think I did talk about it, actually. Yeah, because, yeah. There was that guy who basically was talking about the end of the world was coming. And he thought Trump was going to be the guy. Trump being president and doing what he did in Israel was all part of the plan to kickstart the rapture. That was what this guy was telling me while I was in the queue. He's a lovely old man, but obviously just fucking batshit insane. Lovely. Not the kind. Just a guy who believed in that nonsense. And fair enough. How about it, right? But everyone was super friendly and super nice. And several people remarked on my accent and said, "Oh, so you're an immigrant, are you?" And I thought, "Oh, here we go." But no, they said they think it's great. Think it's great you're here. I mean, now, sure, I'm sure if they did hold any prejudicial thoughts, I'm the right kind of immigrant, aren't I? But no, certainly they were very receptive to, even as a limey, right? And they shouldn't like me. Then, when we got into the rally itself, there was a few moments. There was all the media were behind me, and it was hostile. Like people didn't like the journalists there who were just there doing their job. But it wasn't like it didn't cross the line, except people going like "boo" and "fuck you, fuck off." There was a point in the rally where things got weird. I won't lie. Now, I didn't see any cues, but a guy in front of me was clearly a whack job like that. And so what happened was Trump said, look, and they're here, the fake news media, because he's basically a stand-up, isn't he? He just does his greatest hits on tour. And so they turned around and they were boo, 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 and the fucking CNN journalist has to put down the microphone and just hang their head in shit. "Oh, this is my life. I'm not even Jim Acosta. Like, why are you doing this to me?" Then Trump said, "Anyway, enough about them. You can't criticize them." And this guy shouted, "Why can't you criticize them?" Fair enough, not weird. And then Trump went on and he said something about, the people that own the media have their own interests, and he means Jeff Bezos and corporations. Right, the guy in front of me didn't share that interpretation. Didn't share that interpretation at all. He seemed to think that there was one specific group of people, and he shouted out. Well, first he went, "Why won't you say who it is?" Very adamant, and then he shouted out the label that group that he believed they're from, and I was like, ooh, fucking hell, I am next to a psycho. This is really bad. But to everyone's credit, everyone turned around and said, "Fuck off." And basically was sort of telling him to shut the fuck up and get out. And he did. He was made to feel thoroughly uncomfortable and ended up leaving. And then after the rally, people went their separate ways, having cookouts, or whatever. You know, they make a day of it. People have travelled from all over the country. There was a guy dressed up as Kim Jong-un and was walking around with like he was an impersonator. He did look like him, and he was walking around with a rocket strapped to his back. It was just surreal. But in terms of what I saw, outside of that one fucked up dude, it wasn't. I didn't feel hostile. Didn't see any racism. Didn't see any like fucking, you know. And this was at the height of Q. Didn't see any QAnon adherents. There was just this one fucked up dude, and he got asked to leave. So my takeaway from that one rally is that, in general, it's just boomers, man. It's just fucking Christian boomers. That's it. It's not really a dangerous subset of the fucking, you know, of society. But obviously, every time a journalist fucking describes a Trump rally, they always tunnel in on this, like, the lunatic fringe, as if everyone who's ever wore a red baseball cap is some sort of, you know, card-carrying QAnon adherent. And it's not true. And I know it's not true, because I've been to a rally. I've been to a very big rally. And obviously lived in America during that time. Anyway, I always love when a journalist opens up with a non-attributable quote from an anonymous person, that just a member of the public. By the way, this is like editorial 101. If you see a quote from a total fucking stranger there's not even a name to the person or anything like that, right? And the quote just happens to fit perfectly the point you want to make in it's bullshit. It's garbage. Fuck that. You know, there's a whole season of the fucking Wire about that. So, it was an aside from one QAnon adherent that has stuck with me. A 27-year-old guy who defended the honor of the movement. He was entirely confident in the accuracy and ability of what he supported. He said, as long as I did my own research. So already, I'm hoping you can see where this article's going, right? This is like when fucking Cuomo told you couldn't read the WikiLeaks, that it was illegal. We, the journalist class, we do the research. We tell you doing your own research. Well, you'll end up like bloody QAnon. You'll end up like this made-up guy I met in a made-up car park in a made-up scenario that gave me a completely fucking made-up quote. You can see how, particularly here, this appeal to individual authority is self-defeating. This is a guy who has accepted at least the broad strokes of a conspiracy theory that at its depths hypothesizes a satanic cabal of cannibalistic pedophiles that controls American power. If your unfailing confidence in your own ability to assess credibility led you there, perhaps your confidence is misplaced. And yet, there he was, making that case in that context. This same omnipresent impulse, though, runs like a thread throughout a number of the controversies at the heart of American culture and politics, and of course, through the still mounting death toll from the coronavirus pandemic. I thought the virus got shut down. Rugged individualism and the unfettered internet. Get used to hearing this word a lot more in 2022. It's going to come up during the committee for January 6th. They've already had one run with it, unfettered conversation. Unfettered conversation. Journalists don't like unfettered conversations. They don't like conversations in spaces that aren't moderated or curated in some way. So the word unfettered is going to be the big one. You're gonna hear that a lot in 2022. Mark my words. But anyway, take Joe Rogan. Right now, take Joe Rogan. So this is obviously part of a broader thing that I'm going to talk about in depth. I'm going to take you through the full history on this latest attack on Joe Rogan, because this is all post dewormer. If you're interested in that, I've got a video. It's just called Dewormer. It shows how they basically went after Joe Rogan for saying something that's completely factually accurate about the origins of ivermectin, saying that he was like instead taking a horse dewormer, something that it isn't. It is and it isn't. It is a drug that was originally. Anyway, I'll give you the full history of ivermectin on there. I went deep on it, and basically the point of that is just to show you that Joe Rogan said that, listen, when I got coronavirus, I just wanted to try any treatment whatsoever, and I had a doctor give it to me. And I took erythromycin, I took ivermectin, I took, vitamin D, I took, and basically they latched onto this one word, which was the big no-no medicine that you're not allowed to talk about. And this set off a chain reaction of events where everyone had to pretend ivermectin was the most dangerous substance in America, and hospitals were overloaded because every Joe Rogan fan basically decided to eat ivermectin straight out of the tube meant for horses, which of course wasn't happening. It was all made up. Anyway, go watch that video. Anyway, this is another one of those tricks, right? You see, here's what we do. We go QAnon, definitely real 27-year-old member of QAnon, who says, hey, I do my own research. Can you guess what he's going to criticize Joe Rogan for? And then they talk about, then deliberately in the next paragraph, outline how insane QAnon is as a concept, and then say, listen, but people believe this stuff. Now, take Joe Rogan. Now, Joe Rogan has never platformed anyone that has espoused QAnon talking points, wouldn't, definitely couldn't, even if he wanted to, which he doesn't. The closest he's ever come is with Alex Jones. And you'll remember Alex Jones. I mean, first of all, there were protests around him even appearing on the podcast. Second of all, Joe Rogan wrecks Alex Jones over the shit he says on that podcast because he has to. It's the only way the conversation could be allowed to take place. And, by the way, that episode just deleted. You're not allowed to see it. We all know it happened. Can I watch it? Nah. So, Alex Jones is batshit. I'm all right with that. But he's been right as well, hasn't he? But he's, I guess the stop clock is right 2 times. But yeah, he's batshit insane. And that's fine. He said a lot of nonsense. And I think what Alex Jones does, in the same way I criticize the mainstream media for what they do being dangerous, I think Alex Jones is dangerous in the sense that it masquerades as news. InfoWars isn't a news program. It masquerades as one. It uses the semiology, the language of cable news. So you think you're watching news, and then it's Alex Jones ranting about things that aren't real. And occasionally bringing up an article that's meant to sort of substantiate what he says and give the illusion that he's a news program, which he certainly isn't. So I think that needs to be, regulated. And Richard, I thought you were a fucking libertarian. Listen, this psychological time bomb that's going off in stages across the world, in particular in America, is predicated on the fact that these news outlets are having unfettered conversations. They're putting out state propaganda under the guise of it being impartial news, telling you your next door neighbour's dangerous because he went to a Trump rally once, stalking division, and obviously, we're starting to see more and more acts of political violence. We're starting to see people in Pew Research, something like 54% of America think violence is justified to get your political means. You don't want that being a prevailing sentiment in a country that has unlimited access to guns practically in every state. So what the media are doing is dangerous, but you will never hear the media say, hey, are we radicalizing people? No, YouTube is. Spotify is. They never have the American journalist can't self-reflect. They don't have it in them. I don't even know about, when I say regulation, I mean just have the mechanics for these people to be held accountable. I think it's interesting, isn't it? Like, Joe Biden's been telling the lie, because he loves this one whenever the Second Amendment thing comes up, that gun companies can't be sued. He says it's the only industry that's protected against lawsuits, which are lies. They're just brazen lies. In fact, I think we had a settlement from the families of Sandy Hook today from Remington. First time a gun manufacturers ever settled or accepted any culpability for a mass shooting in America. So Joe Biden's not just demented, he's full of fucking shit. Also, there are a number of industries that enjoy similar protections. Oh, like Big Pharma, which we just got those protections for the fucking thing that we're all been talking about for 2 fucking years. So, I mean, Biden's full of fucking shit. And so who regulates it? Well, state media can't be regulated by the state, obviously. So I guess regulation's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is there should be some form of... there should be a way that citizens who have been harmed by the media can have some recompense. Because libel and defamation laws in America are so fucking generous. These networks can smear you all they want, and all they have to do is say, yeah, well, we did believe it at the time. So, and that's that. It's now, UK libel and defamation laws are completely different and actually serve their function. Anyway, back to the point. What he's done there is he has constructed an article that gets you thinking about QAnon and how if anyone is allowed to make up their own mind and do their own research, it's weird how journalists don't like that, isn't it? Right? Because it's almost if you might find out how many times they fucking lie. And Joe, and then we immediately jump to the, cause of the day, the big cancellation of Joe Rogan, and I'm going to place these things adjacent to each other. It's not a direct comparison, but it is a comparison, and it's in your brain now, and that's what they've done. So by now, you're not only familiar with the podcast host, but probably with his general type. Ooh, those Joe Rogan types. Right? The guy who expounds with enormous confidence in himself, if not always the subject of his exposition. One of the better casual descriptions of Rogan was a Twitter user's 2018 summation. Back when I was a kid, you didn't need Joe Rogan. Your best friend had a 27-year-old brother who would smoke pot in a room with black light posters and tell you that the Mayans invented cell phones. Chill, kind of fun. Happy to embrace the wilder explanation of how things work. Rogan has done his own research. Live on his show, he interviews random people, often contrarians, who offer up their own assessments of whatever subject. The point is often specifically to elevate some outsider perspective, with Rogan often agreeing either in broad strokes or the specifics. This embrace of misleading nonsense and purveyors of the same triggered his current crisis. The theory that drives Rogan, that QAnon guy, and so many others, is, in essence, that in a world without trustworthy experts, everyone can be a trustworthy expert. Now that, see, he's gone off the cliff there, hasn't he? He's driven. He was trying to make a coherent argument, and then he's just fucking careered off. Because Joe Rogan makes no claims to be an expert in any of these things. And I'm sure if you sat down this fictitious QAnon guy you definitely talked to, he wouldn't make any claims to be an expert on anything except the things that he's done his own research on. In fact, nobody who does their own research would then claim to be an expert on a subject. However, what he's breezed by, and this is the conversation that the media is never going to have as long as it stays as is. And that is, why are people untrustworthy of you and your chosen and selected experts in the first place? And of course, then you have to unstitch the rich tapestry of corporate influence in the media, party political operatives getting media jobs and book deals being put out by the publishers that are a subsidiary of the parent company that owns that TV company. Fucking experts that have very clear political agendas, experts that own stocks and shares in certain companies that just so happen to be what that corporate-owned state media bullshit is pushing at that given moment. And that's not even specific, by the way, to anything that might be going on now. I don't want you to think I've gone off the deep end. That is just a historical fact that if you look at the history of American media, which, spoiler, I have done, whatever they want to push will get pushed, and they will bring on whichever experts they need to corroborate what they want to push. Here you go. Here's an example, just to get out of COVID thought for a moment. I was old enough to remember that first war in Iraq, that complete bullshit war in Iraq, right? Where we have to invade. In fact, no, sorry, the second war in Iraq, I should say. Although, actually, it's all academic because We've just occupied that fucking region ever since it had oil. But anyway, you know, the weapons of mass destruction. And they brought on experts that basically said, listen, weapons of mass destruction, weapons of mass destruction, weapons of mass destruction. There's definitely weapons of mass destruction. And they did that thing they do now where they just hammer that phrase. And every expert said Saddam Hussein's a credible threat to the West. There's weapons of mass destruction. The dossier, the government-approved UK-US dual dossier, said there was credible intelligence that within 50 minutes, Saddam Hussein could issue a nuclear strike on major targets in either country. Absolute fiction. Nowhere near. In fact, at the time, the Iraqi elite Republican Guard were running around with guns that they couldn't even afford to put bullets in. But you were supposed to believe this was a credible nuclear threat. Nonsense. Just an excuse to get in, get oil, get big fat fucking contracts to all of Bush's mates and all of Halliburton and all those fucking scumbags. And the fucking media, where were the dissenting voices? Oh, that's right, they were banging the fucking drums, telling you to go to war, and here's a credible expert. And people are dead. Hundreds of thousands of people are dead. That's just as a direct result of the violence and the war and the disease and the sanctions. That's before we get into anything else. That's before we get into the veterans with fucking Gulf War syndrome, or we get to the fucking veterans that commit suicide because they can't live with the heinous acts they did. We've still got Guantanamo Bay open. I mean, so what? And what? The media are just crickets, just chirping out there. When they say, "Oh yeah, we're bringing on an expert," do you remember what happened, by the way, to the expert that said the weapons dossier was sexed up? Dr. Kelly, right? Remember him? Probably not. You're probably too young. Well, I'll tell you what happened to him. Apparently, apropos of nothing, when his name was leaked, why was it leaked? A court ordered a journalist to out the source because it was of the interest of the government to do so. He did because he was a weak bitch and didn't protect his source. Named the doctor. The doctor then, apparently a happily married man with kids, decided in the middle of the night to wander down to the bottom of his garden, slash his wrists very shallowly, in fact 60... A group of something like 60 or 80 morticians and autopsy physician experts said the slashes wouldn't have been enough to bleed out, and take a non-lethal dose of sleeping pills, and died. Weird that, but if you point out that any of that, all facts, go look them up. I was big into the Gulf War shit back then. That was when I used to give a fuck. That was when I used to go on marches. Go look it up. If you bring that up, you're a conspiracy theorist. Oh, these strange coincidences, just all unlucky, yeah. You can even go down the rabbit hole of looking at the Hutton inquiry. That's just brought back some memories. The Hutton inquiry, where basically someone was given, I think they were given, was he already a peer? But anyway, basically he said, nope, the official version's completely correct. I'm completely satisfied. It was definitely a suicide. And then bada bing, a bunch of rewards, and now he's in the House of Lords. So it's all nothing to see here, folks. Nothing to see here. So anyway, when you come from a culture like that backdrop of this media culture, where we never found weapons of mass destruction, by the way, that dossier was a lie, people are dead, and who gets prosecuted for that? Nobody. In fact, all the people that told that lie that should be fucking tried as war criminals, but Kofi Annan, if the UN declared it an illegal war, but you're the US and the UK, you Western nations, you're never going to go to The Hague. Fuck it. They made Tony Blair a peace envoy to the Middle East, if you can even fucking wrap your head around that fucking Orwellian nonsense. So anyway, why don't people trust? Why won't you just trust the experts? Why won't you just trust the media? We've been lying to you consistently for 20, 30 years, pushing, probably longer, pushing state interests, getting you into bullshit wars. We're trying to do that right now, by the way. Biden would love a crisis, wouldn't he? And don't you dare do your own research. Don't you dare. Anyway, back to this. People like scientists at the CDC or Centre for Disease Control and Prevention, or doctors who are interviewed on mainstream cable news outlets, are treated with skepticism because what was once their defining value, their credentialized expertise, has now collapsed into a negative. They think they know better just because they have some degree. The published research, the citations from others in their field, the years of familiarity with the subject matter, all of that was once distilled into this. This is who they say you should talk to. But now the spirit of contrarianism appears as so daunting. What makes this possible is that people can do their own research. It's all having access to information is a problem. A guy sitting at home can click a few links and learn about alternative narratives for everyday mundane occurrences, in the same way that the internet allows those with an interest in little watch Japanese anime, this guy knows how to have a good time, to find one another and form communities. It allows groups of self-declared investigators to dig into everything from the dating patterns of furniture company employees to kidnapping schemes allegedly perpetrated by powerful politicians. Sometimes the internet can amplify the effectiveness of an investigation, particularly when bound to actual expertise. Sometimes it can amplify a downward spiral. What makes this compelling is the sense of ownership, of cracking the code. Rogan is useful here because he's so transparent about how it works. He seeks out a more interesting angle on something that's happening and explores it. Mike's hot. It's often compelling, more compelling than having actual experts on to reiterate the well-understood data behind vaccinations and masks or whatever else is happening in the news, just as it's more compelling for the QAnon adherents. See, you're never going to get a paragraph where Rogan isn't QAnon adjacent now. Just as it's more compelling for the QAnon adherents to think that there's a massive global struggle between good and evil that was playing out behind the walls of the White House than to just think that the Trump administration was kind of a mess. And of course, the anti-elitism. It's not a coincidence that the QAnon movement overlapped heavily with Trump's base of support. Trump gave broad credence to conspiracy theories as president, from claims of voter fraud to theories about criminal migrants. But his political career was largely predicated on the idea that the elites were ruining America, that moreover they were fundamentally inept and shielded by their purported credentials. It's likely, as journalist Matt Iglesias recently noted, that partisanship plays a role. Those with advanced degrees are increasingly politically liberal, which has not gone unnoticed. Trump recognised that he could benefit personally by turning his supporters against those who, by virtue of familiarity with process and research, were trying to redirect him towards reality. His feud with Anthony Fauci was driven by Trump's desire to have people start acting like the pandemic was over, but was centered on the idea that he knew as much about the coronavirus as did government experts who'd been at it for decades. He did say that. He did say he had a natural ability, and doctors said that he should have been a doctor. But Trump's mental, so obviously he says mental things. Again, doesn't say that maybe the elites, whatever that is, whatever that actually is. I mean, I like to think, like you said, just the political class, essentially. Why wouldn't we be distrusting of the political class? It kind of seems like, it feels to me an almost normal position like to take. You should be skeptical about your elected officials. I mean, you shouldn't be, but obviously you have to be. And it brings it back to the thing that I always talk about with all of this nonsense. Like, really, when you get down to it, when you distill it, and I genuinely believe this, because I'll always be a lefty at heart, even though a lot of them just disgust me now. They're just too much. The reality is, it all comes back to class. It all comes back to the wealthy, well-educated people essentially telling the serf class, the working class, you're not allowed, you can't think for yourself. We know better. You can't make decisions for yourself. We've created an entire class of people, essentially, and we've agreed to it for some reason, that get to tell you what to do and how to live your life on your behalf. You put them in power. You play a stupid little political shell game, right, where basically you don't even have any real choice, and you know you don't have any real choice, and you know your vote's meaningless, and you get out of bed, and you go to the ballot, and you put your little X in a box, and the world keeps turning, and fuck all changes, and you're still poor, and you're still miserable, and in fact, it's actually getting worse. You're now working longer hours for less benefits. Your pension's been snatched away, because it turns out all of that shit's just one big pyramid scheme the government's been running, and they keep hoping that we're going to just get more and more people in to keep the pyramid scheme propped up. It's all bullshit and nonsense, and you're being told, don't think about any of this. Because if you do, you might not like it. You might not like the reality in which you exist. You might not like this very privileged political class of people telling you how to exist. And also, we definitely don't want you realizing that you can definitely make some changes. You can do it. I mean, this is why coverage around the Arab Spring didn't They barely touched it on American news. I mean, they talked about it, but then they sort of were a bit like, well, hang on a minute. Yeah, we're gonna get that away. You don't need to think about that. That's happening all the way over there. Now let's talk about, and on it goes. It's why the coverage around the trucker blockade has been so staggeringly negative outside of Fox News. And again, Fox News have their own intrinsic biases as to why they would support it. Because Fox News, a literal propaganda outlet that propagandizes for the elites, for the ruling class, for the political class, now is masquerading as if they are not that. So this is the game, and it is all interconnected. It's not a conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy that big corporations, we know this, control all these media conglomerates and outlets. We know that, local news, it's like a lost leader. No one makes any money off it. You have it because you have to have it. Their leads get written by someone in a office and everyone has to do the same lead. That's when you see that video of them all juxtaposed where they finish each other's fucking sentences. It's, we know that certain types of money flows into the media. We know the media is never going to take a real stance against all the atrocities being committed in China. It's going to go up to a point. It's going to go up to a point where they say, yeah, that's kind of bad. But then that's it. And it's business as usual. These things are all interlinked, and it's not the sign of an unraveled mind or a QAnon adherent to say, I don't like a bunch of fucking, alleged lefties telling me, a working man, that I should just sit back, let Jesus take the wheel, and let these smart cunts live tell me how I need to live my life, because they know better than me. And that's just a natural feeling. And on top of that, they fucking don't, provably. They will just say whatever's on the back of the fucking check. And they do. And we know this. How does it behoove the working class to send working class men to die in wars? How does that help us? How does that help our lot? Yet we are the fodder. Whenever a fucking politicians or a member of the royal family, whenever they're in the fucking combat zone, they're as far away from the fucking combat as possible. Think about fucking Pete Buttigieg as well. What did he do? He said he's a veteran. You were in an office. You were fucking filing forms. What are you talking about? But we can't call it stolen valor because he's on the right team. I cannot abide this idea. And the staggering lack of sort of like, just have a moment. Ask, as you're typing this, does it not feel wrong that, you're comparing a guy who is effectively a self-made dude, which is another reason why a lot of people fuck with Joe Rogan, right? He's a self-made guy. He's done a bunch of interesting stuff. He's lived a really interesting life. And now the thing that he's the most known for is just bringing on people whenever there's something going on, something topical, to come and shoot the shit and smoke a doobie and talk. By the way, that type of conversation, here's what's mad. The Joe Rogan podcast used to be on television in the fucking 70s. It was just a different dude. Like, it was like you had a really intelligent, charismatic anchor that would just talk to a guest. They weren't selling a book. They hadn't been sent there by their media handlers. They weren't giving political rhetoric. They were there with a glass of scotch and a cigarette, and they would just have a conversation about something, and people would just tune in to watch it because it was interesting. Yeah, Dick Cavett. Obviously, over here we had Parkinson. That's what we used to do. Now, if you do it, it's QAnon. It's insane how fucking far over the edge we have gone. So here, I'll read you the end, because this is where he ties it all together and says, the internet is what is to blame. Go bleeding blimey governor. The internet amplifies the problem in another clear way. There's no way to offer a counterweight to those occasions on which Trump or Rogan serves up incorrect information. Kind of feels disingenuous, considering never even heard of a fact checker until the Trump era, right? Fact checkers were like little gremlins that used to lurk on the periphery of the newsroom, a fucking intern or something. They were never named or lauded or put out there because at the end of the day, a journalist is meant to be checking the facts. They were essentially researchers that you just say, can you just double check that date for me or something? If you were lofty enough to be a serious news writer with a byline. Anyway. So they do that, and they've spent a lot of time doing that. In fact, this huge media offensive against Joe Rogan is that. But more importantly, those who listen are not listening to consider one viewpoint that they then test against other sources. They're listening because they're fans, because they trust the sources of information in the first place. I don't even think you can make that as a sweeping statement. I watch the Joe Rogan podcast when there's an interesting guest on, and I listen to what they say. And that's that. And then I go away and apply that to all the other stuff that's out there and see how it measures up. You know, just normal human behavior. But I keep forgetting, because I'm a working class moron, I need a journalist to do it for me. This, ironically, is an appeal to expertise in a different way. Trump, Rogan, and others have earned confidence through an entirely different set of credentials, including mechanisms like choir preaching and ego stroking, things journalists never do. So they are granted trust. 2 decades ago, a pair of researchers named David Dunning and Justin Kruger described a psychological effect in which people who don't know a lot about a subject are necessarily unable to know how little they know about it. They described a pattern in which people learning about a new subject have a quick surge in confidence in their familiarity with it before discovering that the subject is far more expansive than they originally understood. So as they learn more, their confidence fades because now they know how little they know. Dunning and Kruger's original formulation overlapped with a young internet, one without blogs and without social media. It would have been hard to predict how easy it would be for people to learn just enough about the subject to reach that first peak of poorly informed confidence, and then to just stand there, enjoying the view, standing there with thousands of other people, all congratulating each other on their expertise. To have a person climb dozens of peaks at once on a range of different subjects, just standing there, confident, and they got there all by themselves. Now, that last bit is just so staggeringly absent of any self-awareness, because journalists have, for how long now, been telling us they know best. They know best about everything, and yet when they're wrong, and provably wrong, laughably wrong, demonstrably wrong, they don't issue corrections, or they say these things happen. It's never misinformation when it's CNN. It's never misinformation when it's MSNBC. It's misinformation. You know, it's somebody that operates outside of that paradigm. Oh, it can happen to any journalist. You know, we have fallen short of our high standards this time, but you can trust us the next time. And again, and again, and again, and again. And the conversation has to be, why does no one trust the media? It's because you're inherently untrustworthy. You're driving people to Joe Rogan. It's that simple. Nobody goes to an alternative source if the original source is fine. If I go to a restaurant and I get food poisoning, I go to the next one down the road. Maybe not. Maybe I say, oh, hey, everyone gets one. And then I go back again and I get sick again. I'm not going to stop eating at the restaurant. The media's been fucking poisoning people for fucking years. People are sick. And now, unfortunately, they are going out and they are getting new source of information. Yeah, and some of those are unreliable. Whose fault is that? It's yours.